The Andy Poland Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Poland Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Under 60 degrees when you wake up in the morning. High school football off and rolling. College football rolls into what they call week 2, but really is week 3 because we've already had week 0 and week 1, but whatever. And the NFL is back, and whatever you want to complain and say about the product, it always delivers. And although it was pretty late last night, it delivered. It was a heck of an ending between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Baltimore Ravens. And I believe it was Evan Cohen who said it earlier this morning on Unsportsmanlike. It's a 31-team league and the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, the Chiefs really didn't even play all that well last night, and they still took care of the Ravens, who were primed to win that game after losing the AFC Championship game, but did not get that done. I thought a little bit too much carping from Lamar Jackson after the game. It took them 15 seconds to look at the replay and show that Isaiah Likely's toe was out of the end zone, and it should have been overturned. It was not a touchdown, but he's maintaining that it was. That's not really a good look for him, but boy, as a as a quarterback, a dual threat, he's just remarkable. Had a good passing night. He was, 26 of 41, 273 yards and a touchdown, and he ran 16 times for 122 yards. Patrick Mahomes, who's also a runner, he ran twice for 3 yards. And that's, not any criticism of Mahomes. It's just that Lamar is just at another level. The problem that they have with the Ravens, and it's, they're still going to win 12 games this year, maybe more, but it's getting over that hump into the playoffs. And when you're in the playoffs, what you do, and everything seemed to set up perfectly for them last year. The Chiefs did not have a great regular season and had to play the AFC Championship game on the road in Baltimore, and Lamar couldn't get it done. And by saying, and we'll hear what John Harbaugh has to say later on about that, but he said that Kansas City is his kryptonite. That's not something you want to hear from your quarterback. Kryptonite is what would cripple Superman. And yes, Lamar is in many ways Superman, but you don't want to admit that an opponent that you're going to have to get past to get to the Super Bowl is your kryptonite, because that puts doubt in your mind. It puts doubt in everybody else's mind. And I'll get to John Harbaugh's comments on that. We do Ravens preview every Friday, and this time it's Ravens review as they lost last night to the Kansas City Chiefs 27-20. Meantime, is there anyone that would disagree with what Commanders defensive coordinator Joe Witt Jr. said?
It is better for this country when football is going on. I believe that. It brings the right and the left together. It brings the north and the south. Everybody comes together, all right, for football. All right, it's the best team sport. So it's just, I'm just glad to be and honored to be a part of it at the highest level, and hopefully we could go out here and put a product together that that the fans here in Washington are proud of, because these men have been working their butts off for that, and I'm itching to put it on the field and let's get this thing started and take it one game at a time and start with Tampa and just go out there and compete our butts off, and not only compete, we're here to win. So that's what we want to do.
We don't know yet how great of a defensive coordinator Joe Witt is going to be, since he's never done that before. He gets a step up on this staff. He'd been the secondary coach under Dan Quinn with the Cowboys, and he comes here as the defensive coordinator. But, boy, he talks a good game, doesn't he? He sounds like a guy that you'd want to play for. Now, to be fair, we felt kind of the same way about Eric Bieniemy last year, and it didn't work out. Maybe not all of Bieniemy's fault. He was saddled with a quarterback who was essentially a rookie in Sam Howell. The offensive line wasn't very good, but as an offensive coordinator, he was lacking. You don't throw the ball as often as you do when you have those circumstances. Bad offensive line, inexperienced quarterback, and you get 4 wins. But as we launch into the 2024 season, you gotta like what Joe Witt Jr. is saying, and I would agree that when football is back, everybody feels a lot better. Whatever election stress you may be feeling right now, another tragic school shooting the other day. Not that football should necessarily, push that into the background, but there's a lot of stressful things in life, And when Lord Football makes its return and fills up your weekend with wonderful, wonderful stuff, it's great. And we got football tonight. It's a rare opportunity for the NFL. They never miss a trick. And because we have a Friday after Labor Day before the NFL launches into its Sunday, the technicality allowed them to play a Friday night game. And this is going to be in Brazil. Now, I wonder if they're ever going to go back there because the players are very nervous about the violence that takes place there. The Eagles are going to wear white jerseys tonight because they're concerned about gang violence in Brazil. I mean, it's crazy. But the NFL knows how to make money, and this is a Peacock game. And Peacock is paying plenty of money. It's an NBC product, but it's an arm of NBC. They're paying plenty of money to put this game on TV, so that's going to be on Peacock tonight. And I'll give you some facts and figures a little bit later on about the amount of money that is coming through with streaming. The NFL knows it made a bad deal with the networks, and it has a reopener coming up in, I think it's, 2029, so another 5 years. And, boy, once they do that, don't be surprised if it doubles because you've seen what happened in the NBA that has a fraction of the ratings. They're at $7.5 billion a year. The NFL is between $10 and $11 billion. So you look at the numbers, it's more than double in the NFL. Even these streaming games, you're getting 23 million people watching it. It's a playoff game. I understand that. But that's where we're going with this. And Lord Football being back is huge. The big thing for the Commanders, obviously, on Sunday is the progress of Jaden Daniels, because not only does a lot of this season ride on him, it's really the future of the franchise. I mean, we've had 8 different starting quarterbacks in the last 8 years. That includes Kirk Cousins, who got 3 straight years as a starter, but it's been one experiment after another gone wrong. You know, whether it's Ryan Fitzpatrick, who took 16 snaps before his career came to an end. Carson Wentz, who turned out to be a disaster. You know, propping up Sam Howell last year, you name it, has not worked. And the hope is that the second pick of the draft is going to do what everybody hopes with the organization will happen. Kliff Kingsbury, the offensive coordinator, asked yesterday what he's looking for from Daniels in his opening game.
Really just his competitive nature. I mean, he's pretty laid back, chill cat, but when he steps on that field, I mean, he's trying to rip your head off, and he's talking trash to the DC and the DBs and everybody else. But it's fun-natured. But that's just watching him compete. When you're out in practice, you don't see him really take off and run and things like that because we're not tackling him. So just to see that competitive nature come out in his first game, and it's not always going to be pretty, but just him continue to battle and try to lead those guys, that will be a lot of fun for me to witness.
We haven't really seen a lot of the trash talking. Now, we haven't seen much of him, period, because he played only 3 series in the entire preseason. And I think that's going to be telling as well. They felt confident enough with what they saw. You also have to balance it against the possibility of injury because, you know, there's that thing that goes on, too, that you have to be concerned about. But, you know, the fact that we didn't get much of a glimpse of him, and here's the offensive coordinator, Kliff Kingsbury, talking about him being a trash talker. That's not really what we've seen. All we've heard is, oh, yeah, he's very humble, and he has been in his news conferences. He's very focused. He comes in at 5 o'clock in the morning to watch tape and work out with his receivers and things like that. I mean, everything points to this being a very, very successful season and a successful career. But you never know, and as Kingsbury says, it's the first game, and you got to get that out of the way.
It just is what it is. The first one of the NFL is a different experience, a different level of football, but he's worked really hard to prepare for this moment, and his teammates have seen it, the coaches have seen it, and that's definitely gained him some respect, and it goes a long way when things aren't going well and you have some adversity. So I'm anxious to watch him play myself. I know he's going to cut it loose. He's a tremendous competitor, and he's excited for the opportunity.
Is he going to be allowed to cut it loose? I would imagine. I mean, this is the offense that Kingsbury has run, and there is the blitz that they have to worry about. This is Todd Bowles, who knows he's got a rookie quarterback here. The offensive line, yeah, I mean, Nick Allegretti, getting him from Kansas City at one guard is going to be big, and they made a move yesterday or the other day to lock up Sam Cosmi for long term. But, the tackles may be questionable. They're changing out the tackles. We'll see how they play. But by and large, this is going to be a really eye-opening as to what we see. I don't think it's going to be anything like RG3's debut 12 years ago, because that was a new offense that they were unveiling. This was the pistol offense. Now everybody runs it. And Daniels is a product of the success of that over the years, including RG3's rookie year. But how much he's going to run, will he be able to get down and protect himself? We'll have to see. Remember, he played behind a very good offensive line last year at LSU. In fact, they were named tops in the country. This is not the best offensive line in the NFL, so that's something to keep in mind. This is more from Joe Witt, who has practiced against him, and what he has seen so far in defending Jaden Daniels in practice.
Everybody talks about him coming in early and doing all that, which he does, but the moxie that he has when he's, under center, the ability to go back and forth with Bobby Wagner as if he is a 5-year pro. You don't see rookies do that. The ball pops out of his hand. The natural ability that you see from the kid, that he can run, he can throw, but he's a leader. All right, you don't have to be a 30-year-old man to be a leader in this league. He is a leader right now, and he's somebody that the guys want to follow. So he's been competitive. That he hasn't put the ball in harm's way a lot in practice, and he's a guy that's gonna win a lot of games for us.
No, we'll see. It starts on Sunday. The over/under this year ain't much. It's like 6.5. And that, I guess, a 7-win season would be 3 more than last year, would be considered an improvement. And I think there's a great level of patience, but we got to see if this is going to be a guy, because I think by the end of the year, you're going to have a pretty good idea about his long-term success. It's possible he'll really struggle, as Peyton Manning did, throwing 28 interceptions in his rookie year. There's things like that they have to be concerned about. But I think you'll have a handle on him as a pro quarterback by the end of the year. I mentioned the streaming numbers, and the story this morning in USA Today about this, and the headline says, or the lead says, NBC Universal's grip on the American sports viewer will be tightened during the first weekend of the 2024 regular season, with 3 games and 4 nights on their properties, including its streaming arm, Peacock. And, as the NFL has realized, hey, we can spin some of this stuff off in streaming and make even more money, of course they're going to do it. And that's what they've been doing, as we saw with a playoff game last year, 2 playoff games. I guess there's going to be another 2 this year. There's the 2 games on Christmas Day, so forth. They talked to a streaming analyst, if there is such a thing, as he identifies as this, Dan Rayburn, who says that the NFL's motivations are hurting the average fan who wants to enjoy games with ease. The NFL is more fragmented than anybody else out there from a sports league standpoint, and obviously the reason for that is money. Baseball's doing the same thing, and they're shooting themselves in the foot. I don't know how much this is hurting football, but it is making it tougher, and it's making it tougher for the older fan like me. Peacock paid a reported $110 million for last season's wildcard playoff game between the Chiefs and Dolphins. This year, that exclusive postseason streaming slot was awarded to Prime for $120 million. Netflix paid a reported $150 million for the 2 Christmas Day games, which, by the way, are on a Wednesday. Okay? So, NFL doesn't play a Wednesday, but, people are home on Christmas. We're going to take it. The ratings are always great. NFL accounting for 93 of the top 100 broadcasts in the U.S. last year. And one of the things you've heard from Roger Goodell about this streaming stuff is, we're trying to reach a younger audience, as if somebody younger wouldn't know how to watch a game on cable TV. As Rayburn points out, 15-year-olds have no money. Another argument the league makes for putting games exclusively on streaming is that the matchups are available in the local market on traditional network TV. That strategy ignores the fan who grew up rooting for one team and moved to a different market but doesn't want to have to pay to watch his or her team. I think it's up to close to $600 if you get the YouTube package this year. Rayburn goes on to say the NFL doesn't care about fans. The NFL cares about making the most money possible, and there's nothing wrong with that. Because if you're a sports league, your job is to get paid for your content. But at some point, you have to realize fans are only willing to jump through so many hoops to get what they want from a sports standpoint. That's a good point, but I've been amazed at how easily people have adapted to the streaming, including the playoff last year, where 23 million people watch the Chiefs and the Dolphins. And the number tonight, which is a Peacock-only game, the Eagles and the Packers, it won't get near that, won't get near 23 million. But it's a Friday night, which is not a big night for television, and the NFL will probably win the night. And it's not a network number either. I mean, I don't even know how they calculate these things in terms of Nielsen ratings and so forth, but it will be double-digit millions tonight. It will be over 10 million, maybe 12 million people watching this game, which is just remarkable. And there are still some people, because and I think they did this on purpose on the heels of the Olympics, where people ordered the Peacock package to watch, all the Olympics live. And here we are less than a month later, and there's a football game. So I think that people looked at it and said, well, should I cancel Peacock now? No. We got a game coming up in early September, so I'm going to do that. Amazing. And I guess the biggest mover and shaker for all this is Jerry Jones, whose franchise has been valued at $11 billion, which is $3 billion more than the second-place team, which would be the Los Angeles Rams in the second biggest market, and nearly double what the Commanders' valuation is at $6.2 billion. Jerry, for better or for worse, has been a big moneymaker for the NFL. And he did an extended interview with Stephen A. Smith the other day. I'm going to play some highlights of that as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Orioles back at it tonight against Tampa. Coverage here starts at 6:30. I guess the Orioles this time of year, now the school's back, they have 6:30 games during the week, but weekends, which would include Friday night, they start at 7. So it's a 7 o'clock start tonight with a 6:30 pregame. Whatever you want to say about Stephen A. Smith, he hustles. I don't even think this was an ESPN property. I think it's something he's allowed to do on the side because it really was not presented as an ESPN interview. This was Stephen A. on his own, arranging for a 1-hour sit-down with Jerry Jones. And they're both full of each other, of themselves and each other, maybe. I don't know. I mean, this was kind of a love-in, although Stephen A. did ask some really good and pointed questions and did pursue some angles. But Jerry's very good at deflecting and moving things along. He's a tremendous salesman. And yes, his ego maybe has prevented him from having a team that could reach the success that he did early on. But you got to give him credit for what he's done for his team in making it the most valuable franchise of the NFL at $11 billion and raising for everybody else. I mean, he talked about in this interview when he first came into the league, Art Modell owned the Cleveland Browns then, and Modell was one who made his money in television advertising, knew the business, and he was trying to get the other owners to support a plan where they would get less money from television. I mean, that's inconceivable now, for sure. But, when they made that deal with Fox in 1993, that was really a game changer. Like, CBS had the rights forever. They thought they were going to keep the rights. They had a nice, cozy relationship with the NFL. And Rupert Murdoch steps in, offers double, and the rest is history. And Jerry also looked at how they were making money from products. They were not making the most that they could. He made separate deals with Nike and Pepsi and things, and everybody else did too. And so he deserves some credit for that. But as a general manager of a team, which is what he is, he identifies himself as the GM first and owner second. He's not been good. I mean, ever since they won that Super Bowl in 1995, right? That was January of 95, so we're looking at almost 30 years. Bupkis, they won a couple of playoff games. That's it. So they've also had an unusual summer in that they've had these contract situations. The Dak Prescott still unresolved, and the CeeDee Lamb thing dragged on all summer. Finally, they made a deal to pay Lamb the market value for a top receiver. And Stephen A. asked Jerry Jones, basically, what the hell took so long here?
Now, let me get this straight.
Yes, sir.
We're not we're questioning whether or not I had the same evaluation of CeeDee Lamb because I was a little slow in people's opinion about getting him on paper.
Okay.
When he got on paper, did you see how much went on paper?
Yeah, I did.
Now, the same guy that was slow is the one that wrote that number on that paper and signed it.
Right.
There was never any question about how we felt C.D. Lamb was as a football player or what he could do to basically help our team.
But, Jerry, that's what feeds into my question. We know you didn't doubt it. We can see that. So somebody is looking at Jerry Jones and they're saying, this man knows what he's doing. He knows what a talent he has. He knows he's going to sign this guy. What takes him so long? So how do you answer the question about what took you so long when you knew exactly what he was worth and what you were going to do in the end?
I haven't, and I'm not trying to be cute, but I don't see any rewards or I don't see any penalties on your timer. On does he get on the field, and is he on the field when he ought to be out there? And so I had no urgency at all about getting him to the field. Now, I'm sensitive about what fans and all of the ones that are against the Cowboys as well as all the ones that are for the Cowboys. And I want to look good as well as anyone else. But it was important for us to, on every aspect, to really try to husband as much of the resources that would go in Lamb's direction. It was critical for us to husband $1,000, $50,000, $100,000, because in our system, that's that much more that we've got to pay Parsons, or that's that much more for us to pay that young offensive lineman that we want to renew his contract 3 years from now. It's a zero-sum game. And by the way, this isn't the world's smallest fiddle here. Boy, I'm so lucky to get to do this. But also know that just because you have $1,000 in your bank account, have you ever thought that you may owe $3,000 back over here in bills? And so when you see that and you say, well, I've got the money, I'm going to go do it, unless you look around the corner a little bit, you may not be able to do it. I'm looking at all times, certainly the short-term part of any contract with any player. But I'm also looking longer term. I have to look 3 years down the road, if you will, sometimes maybe 5 years down the road. I have a very good feel, as good as anybody, about what the future is going to be for the teams in the NFL regarding revenue. I understand it very well. I've spent 35, 40 years doing almost nothing but thinking about NFL, the revenues.
This is your 36th year coming up. This is your 36th year coming up.
36 year. Yes. And by the way, I coveted being in the NFL. I was looking at it 4 or 5 years before that.
You wanted a piece of the Chargers at the time, if I remember correctly.
Exactly. My point, without being long-winded, is this is a long-range life that you have to deal with in intermittent short-term decisions in many cases. CD's contract had everything to do with how important he was to the future of the Dallas Cowboys. It had everything to do with rewarding him for how he had evolved as a key player for the Dallas Cowboys. But it also had everything to do with how he was going to fit in our picture years down the road.
So Jerry said he didn't want to be long-winded, but he took 4 minutes and 15 seconds to answer that question. And I think what you get is they didn't really handle the salary cap very well. You know, he's talking about down the line and how, you know, they got other contracts to deal with, Micah Parsons coming up, so forth and so on. Revenue will go up when they get the new TV deal, but that can't be opened, I believe, for another 5 years. This is a 4-year deal that they signed with C.D. Lamb. Now, as a receiver, he may be done by then, but you know, this is pretty much an admission that Jerry, as the general manager, and the general manager has this responsibility. They have cap people that work with them, but it's up to the GM to manage the cap, and he's almost admitting there that he's done a terrible job with that. And then when you get to the Dak question, Here's where he really just almost spits out, I didn't really know how to do this properly, and that's why we have a franchise quarterback at the age of 31 going into the last year of his contract, and if he doesn't sign a deal, he's an unrestricted free agent at the end of the year, and God knows what he can make. Here's Jerry on Dak.
It's very important that we have a way to reconcile this with Dak, because we've had the benefit of a lot of supporting cast with Dak over the last 5, 6, 7 years.
Yes.
Would you give us that?
Yes, I would, in a heartbeat.
Okay, so we've had a lot of supporting cast. There's no question that with Dak having been very well paid over the last 4 or 5 years.
$157.4 million over the last 4 years.
Over the last 4.
That's right.
There's no question that I got some of that off my credit card.
Okay.
In other words, I spent some money that I didn't have. Right. Very common in the NFL. Matter of fact,
and common with you, because that's what you did when you first bought the Cowboys.
Well, it is. Yeah. It very much is. But you certainly, I'd like to say I did then too, but I had a passion that I wanted to get involved that I scratched then that I'm not scratching that passion as much right now. I'm trying to be real practical, at least in this explanation to you. But the facts are that not only have we had great supporting cast around Dak, we have also spent some of the money that we've got to spend on Dak in the future. That went in on his last contracts. Right. That's the way the cap works, and that's usually when you have a high-priced quarterback, what you do. So we have the challenge of not only recouping what we have spent on him over the last 4 years, we've got to add that to what we're going to be paying him for the future. Now, that's not Dak's problem, only in that it's the Dallas Cowboys' problem, because that money is not going to be there to spend on supporting cast. And so we've got to ask ourselves, can we have the kind of success that Dak deserves, we deserve, his teammates deserve, our fans deserve? Can we do that and get in the range to afford Dak? I think we can.
I like the way he uses the word spunt. He says spend, but instead of spent, it's spunt. And what he's saying there is he spunt money that he didn't have, and now he's got to figure out a way to keep him and pay the guys around him. Now, he paid CeeDee Lamb, but this defense without Micah Parsons is going to be a different story. You got to pay your offensive linemen to protect them and so forth. You bring back Ezekiel Elliott, who's pretty much done. He played last year in New England. They didn't want him back, so he comes back, and Jerry's gone on and on about how he looks like Jim Brown to him. Oh, please. So there's that. So, what you're hearing here, he does a good job of filibustering, but if you listen to the comments that he makes about CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott, he's done a damn poor job of handling the cap. Now, what is he doing to trying to get around that? Well, he's making the pitch, I think particularly to Dak, that playing for the Dallas Cowboys, maybe while you're playing, might not be the most lucrative thing you could do for your career, but for the long term, it makes sense. And here's the Jerry Jones pitch on that.
And I will tell you that if you will look around the corner a little bit, not all have it right this second, because it sure wasn't here immediate when I got involved with the Cowboys. Matter of fact, most things I've ever been in my life didn't have immediate killer benefits or killer returns. If you can, as a player, look around the corner a little bit, look years down the road, I think you will see some of the benefits of the Dallas Cowboys. One of the things that I guess I'm the most rewarded by, not proud of, rewarded by, is that I'm partners with many of our ex-players. I'm partners with players that played here 20 and 30 years ago. And we do things together financially. We do things together to get involved in their careers. They're my life. Well, just like being with anybody 20 years ago, if you had a intense relationship, if you had a great experience, those guys become your buddies. And when they come in and they're a little wounded, buddies help buddies. Or when they come in and got an opportunity, then let old Jerry get involved with you a little way. By the way, those same guys, I can't tell you the time they reached out and helped old Jerry in these last 30.
They swear by you.
When I have been on a knee, and believe it or not, I get on a knee. I do. We all do. Many times, I've stumbled, and I've had help from my ex-players, if you will. So that's what happens when you spend your life together. Now, that is a fact. I'm not personally going to be around forever, but that is a fact. So do I try to share that? Do I not share it, but do I try to talk that when I'm visiting with a player about it's better to be here? There's no state income tax in Texas.
I'm fully aware.
As you are well aware of.
Very
and
well
so
aware.
Do it out in California or any place else, and you won't take home as much. All of that has a place. Now, you got to understand something. I'm sitting here. I've given a lot of my life, and I'm going to tell you something. Nobody appreciates what a football player, the things that have gone through him. I know the times when it didn't look good. It happens to everybody. I know the times when you're hurt. I get it all. So I admire the guys that play this game. But I would like for them to enjoy life after football. And the Cowboys enable you to do that. We've got some guys that are good on television. Doesn't just take you baseball players or basketball
I mean,
players.
I beat them up constantly, but I get what you're saying.
But
I
you
mean,
see what I mean.
They're good when they're going up against somebody other than
Yeah.
me, because I don't let the Cowboys beat me.
And well, let me say this, and I've got that, but also the opportunity is there playing for the Cowboys if you will listen and know how to use it. You got to know how to spread the Cowboy peanut butter on the cracker, and it'll help you down the road.
That is a great elevator pitch. You got to know how to spread the Cowboy peanut butter on the cracker. And you look at television and you see all the ex-Cowboys working for ESPN. And some of them weren't even in high-profile positions. So it is helpful to have played for the Cowboys, and the guys on television will tell you that. But things have changed. And with the amount of money that you make playing football now, it's hard to really rationalize down the road, especially when you're 28, 29 years old, that you can make X amount of dollars more as an ex-Cowboy than being for another team. And I think no matter what happens with Dak Prescott, he's always going to be identified as a Cowboys quarterback. And he's, he may buy into this because he grew up in Louisiana and he grew up rooting for the Cowboys. I mean, this is a dream come true to be the star quarterback on their team. But I think it's lessened now than it was. A couple of examples. Roger Staubach played his whole career with the Cowboys. One of the greatest quarterbacks in the history of the NFL, the greatest quarterback who ever played for the Cowboys, won 2 Super Bowls there. And even when he was playing, he started his own commercial real estate company, which he sold long after he finished playing for like $600 million. He was an enormous business success in Dallas, and playing for the Cowboys certainly was helpful for that. Sam Huff, really angry when the Giants traded him to the Redskins in 1964. But the fact of the matter is, Sam did very well here post-football by playing for the Redskins. He made a deal with Marriott, became an executive with them, had a long radio career. I don't think those things would have happened for him with the Giants, and he was able to take advantage of that. So, yes, there's no question that playing for the Cowboys helps you with your profile post-football, but there's just so much money now that are you going to turn down potentially $10 to $15 million to stay in Dallas just so you'll have a better post-football career? Some might, and maybe it might work that way for Dak, but that's hard to sell these days, and the agents don't want to do that. The Players Association doesn't want to do that. So that's going to be kind of a tough sell for Jerry. The big issue for him as the general manager, as it is for anybody who's a general manager, is your record. And the record for Jerry post Jimmy Johnson, and you can say Barry Switzer too, though Switzer, basically didn't screw it up or did the first year and then won a Super Bowl the second. Probably could have won more if he'd have been a better coach. But, Stephen A. puts it to him. You are, as Bill Parcells says, what your record is.
It's entering 29 years since you guys have played in an NFC Championship game or gotten to a Super Bowl. Now, here's what I've said. I've looked at numerous rosters you've put together, and I said, damn it, they got the talent. He did his job there. The critique, however, I would throw in 7 head coaches since you last won the Super Bowl and only 5 playoff wins in that span. You hear that number, you hear those stats. What comes through your mind? How do you feel?
The big thing that I'm disappointed in is that I got a chance to have a player on the Cowboys at the same time, Tony Romo. Mm-hmm. And we didn't get a Super Bowl. Now, that's a shortcoming. What did I not do that contributed to that?
2-4 in the playoffs, his record.
And my point is, yes, disappointing, but you really can't do, for me, what I do. If you don't go over and dwell on at the same time, you're evaluating your shortcomings, you gotta reach over and grab you a little of the good things that have happened to you. And I truly have had it so good in my lifetime. I've had great parents. I've been around some of the greatest friends in the world. People have enabled me. My best thing is that I've had 10 different people in my lives give me grace. Forgive me, give me grace, help me. When you got all of that, fussing about not winning a Super Bowl last year, I want to clear you out of the way. Lightning's going to strike me. I've had it too good. Now, that's how I do it. That doesn't suffice for the responsibility I feel to our fans and to the people that are great sports folks and great fans. But I will say this, it gives me a lot of resolve. No one that knows me would think that you take any of these evaluations about sports teams, and I say that almost sounding condescending, and I'm not. Take anything tangible, valuable. No one would understand more than the people around me that I'd give all that for a first down at the right time. I'd give it all for a touchdown at the right time, or certainly a win, much less in a championship game or a Super Bowl.
Okay, that's just Jerry talking out of both sides of his mouth. When asked about his record, he says, I don't dwell on it. I think about the good things in my life. And then he pivots to, but it's the fan base that wants it. And I feel a responsibility to them, and I would give anything to get a Super Bowl, paraphrasing here. Well, the one thing you have to do is you have to fire the general manager. You have to fire Jerry Jones as the general manager, and you have to have somebody who can put together your team because, as you've been talking about there, while not necessarily admitting it outright, you've done a terrible job managing the salary cap, and that's why you're in this corner with Dak Prescott right now and Micah Parsons down the road. I mean, this is Jerry Jones, the GM at 83 years old, failing at that. So, really, if you feel a responsibility to the fan base and you'll do anything to give them a win, fire the general manager, and his ego won't allow him to do that. Last thing from Jerry, and the late, great Steve Sable would have been able to do something with NFL Films, but this is Jerry Jones, and imagine in your mind some type of music behind this and NFL highlights. Jerry Jones explaining what football in America is.
The game itself is hard work. It takes little boys, big boys, fat boys, slim boys. It takes all kinds. Now, when they get in that huddle, everybody gets together and they kind of bleed alike, and they're on a team. They're a part of it. But all of that goes on. We're sitting here in Texas, and I'm telling you right now, football is a part of the earth and the trees around here. It's here. That's all there is
to it.
And girls have gone to heard about two-a-days all their lives in many cases. Football is a life around here. And most of it is hard work. Most of it is mundane. Dare I say that? But it's hard work and mundane. But guess what we do? We take a block and we take two big boys bumping into each other, and we make it into the Colosseum of Rome, and we make it like the Roman gladiators. And we put my town against your town. Here in Texas, they do that. Put my school against your school. In our case, it's the Browns against the Cowboys out there with that right there. We embellish it and make it bigger than life.
Well, you know why they would say about Jerry Jones that he could sell ice to the Eskimos. There you heard it. The whole interview's up on YouTube. Stephen A. Smith talking to Jerry Jones for about an hour. The worst and best openers for the Commanders over the years. I got my list. We'll get to it next. It's the Andy Poland Show, ESPN 630. So, over the last 10 years or so, you've kind of had to suspend reality when looking ahead to the football team's upcoming season, whether they were the Redskins or the Washington football team or the Commanders. Because until last season, it was always Dan Snyder's team. It was not Dan Snyder's team last year, but it was just too late for the Josh Harris group to do anything. They couldn't change the coach. They couldn't change the players. They had what they had, and they had to slog through the 2023 season, which was a slog, a 4-win season. Well, it's a new day, and they had a full year to get things right. There's a general manager in place. There's a new coach in place. And there's all kinds of hope riding on a new quarterback who was the second pick of the draft. So it's a brand new day. And we'll take a look in just a moment at openers that have taken place over the years and how they've gone. I've got a list of the 3 worst and the 4 best. I couldn't narrow the best down to 3. So it's the top 4 and the bottom 3 of openers over the years, no matter what the name of the team was, and I'll get to that shortly. I just want to throw this in because we're going to do Ravens. Well, today it's Ravens Review. We call it Ravens Preview, generally on Fridays, as they have games either on Sunday or Monday night, but they opened last night, so it's going to be a little bit of a review of what happened in Kansas City. But among the things that's interesting to everybody in the league is the way that they called the offensive line penalties on how they were lined up in the formation, illegal formation. Ronnie Stanley, who's an excellent left tackle for Baltimore, is flagged 4 times in the first half. And this is something that the league is obviously wanting to put emphasis on this year, how players line up. But isn't that what the preseason is for? I mean, didn't that, no matter who you were rooting for last night, didn't that bother you, all the flags for a ticky-tack thing? And, this is, I guess, how they train the players. Hey, we're going to call this, and they knew everybody in the league was watching. Even John Harbaugh made mention of that last night in the news conference. Yeah, we were the first team to play, so, we'll see how it sorts out for the rest of the season. But, in case you're not familiar with it, it designates that a team has failed to properly align with 7 players on the line of scrimmage for an offensive player. Now, tackles are typically permitted to line up off the line if their helmet isn't behind the waist of the center. But this has been a gray area in recent years. We had it week 1 last year when Chiefs right tackle, Juwan Taylor, was repeatedly and egregiously offsides against the Lions, resulting in several flags and even more media critique. It sort of, settled itself out during the season, but we'll see this game tonight. The Packers and the Eagles are playing in Brazil, so let's see how often they call it. Not as big of an audience because it's going to be on Peacock only, so maybe that'll be a factor, but we'll see because it really did seem to be an over-officiated game. The great Marv Levy soundbite, yelling at an official, "You over-officious jerk," and I felt kind of that way about the calls last night in the game. Tom Lovero's got a column today. It's sort of a pump your brakes deal. Not that, we've spent the offseason going, oh, my God, look at what we got here. Now, there are some who are jumping on and saying Commanders could win the division, could be a playoff team. Jaden Daniels could be that good. There are some people who I really respect, like Louis Riddick, who have said that's the best quarterback in the draft. And if he had the number 1 pick, he would have taken Jaden Daniels over Caleb Williams. So there's that kind of hype. But, even when you talk to the coaches, they're like, let's see. We want to get better. And there's going to be, a honeymoon period here, even though it's year 2 under the ownership of Josh Harris. It's as I say, it's been a complete turnover here. So there's going to be a honeymoon period for this team. And if they win 6 or 7 games, that's not enough to get you in the playoffs, but it's a significant improvement over last year. And you're also going to have to look at what you see on the field. Remember this about the RG3 season. People forget this because they won the division by winning their last 7 games. But they started off the year 3-6. They were 3-6 after they lost at home to Carolina. And after the game, Mike Shanahan was talking about evaluating players for next year. And to Robert Griffin III's credit, he said, I'm going to take the bye week, and I'm going to come back better than ever, and I'm going to do my best to get this team into the playoffs. And he did. He did that. So, how this team looks is going to be, I think, more important than the record, especially in the early part of the season. If they can make an RG3 type of run at the end of the year, so be it. But that's not really what this season is going to be about. And Adam Peters has done, I think, a good job of overhauling things. I like the setup where the GM hires the coach. Dan Quinn, the coach, only coaches, not like Ron Rivera running the whole show. That's good. And Josh Harris held a news conference last week, which Dan Snyder never did. And he said the record was dismal last year, and we better be better than that. And as Lavero writes today, Harris and his partners are putting $75 million into fixing up the worst stadium perhaps in all of professional sports. They raised ticket prices to come to, as he says, duct tape field, and are charging some of the highest prices in the NFL for concessions. So yes, when the Commanders take the field Sunday in Tampa for the opener, they better be better than that. How much better? What are the expectations? Odds makers have put the Commanders over-under for wins at 6.5. The Athletic projected the team's win total at 5.9, worst in the NFC. Either way, that's better than the 4 wins from last year, is it not? Also this, Daniels will be the 36th different starting quarterback for Washington since Super Bowl quarterback Mark Rippon started the 1993 season. So think about that. 31 years, 36 different starting quarterbacks. And here's another important point that he makes here, and this is, I think, part of the reason that they keep talking about how important it is for him to get down, to slide. At LSU, where Daniels passed for 3,800 yards and 40 touchdowns last year, he was behind one of the best offensive lines in college football, a semifinalist for the Joe Moore Award given annually to the best offensive line in the country. He had perhaps the best receivers in college football with 2 receivers, Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas, who were picked in the first round of the draft. Daniels was put in a position to succeed. Now he is the one that will have to put the Commanders to succeed. Those expectations are a lot of pressure. And it is a lot of pressure on him. And again, I think it's lessened because it's the first year. But the long term is, let's hope. Let's see. All right, let me launch into this. I spent a little time putting this list together. And why don't we start with the worst, and then we'll move to the best. And I've picked the 3 worst season openers, all of them as the Redskins. They were the Redskins for all 3 of them. In fact, this entire list is when the team was known as the Redskins, which they were through the 2019 season. This may not seem like a big deal, but you got to remember, and this is, part of this is context, where this team was. So they go into the 1984 season, and they had been to the Super Bowl back-to-back years. They had won it in January of 83. They get back in January of 84, and they got clobbered by the Raiders. It was a complete disaster, 38-9. But a lot of people thought, it was just kind of a bad day. Jack Squirick had that interception just before the half. They're going to get back on track. They're the Redskins, and there was no salary cap in those days. So, Reagan still had something left in the tank at that point. So they go into the 1984 opener. And it's Dan Marino starting his second year in the NFL. That's the one year that he would go to the Super Bowl. They played at RFK Stadium, and Marino lit them up. He only threw 28 passes for 311 yards and 5 touchdowns. So nearly a fifth of his passes went for touchdowns. 2 of them to Mark Duper, 26 and 74 yards. I can still see that 74-yarder in my head. Jim Jensen, who they called Crash, he caught 2 of them, and Mark Duper caught the other. Joe Theismann had a bad day, 21 of 36. He was intercepted twice, no touchdowns, a 51.2 rating. And the reason I put that as the worst, because it was sort of a reality check. Like, the Camelot period is over. It's over temporarily because they got back on track later in the decade, but the Theismann-Riggins duo, that's when we knew was coming to an end. They still made the playoffs that year, hosted a playoff game, but the tide was turning. They were no longer the top dogs. Number 2 on the list, the second worst opener that I can remember, September 9th of 1985, this following year. They opened at Dallas. This was Joe Theismann's birthday. And they had 7 turnovers while Theismann was intercepted 5 times in just an ugly 44-14 loss. It was just absolutely terrible what happened to them in that game. There was a pick 6 in this game by Victor Scott. In fact, there were 2 of them. 2 of them picked off for touchdowns. The worst opener that I can remember, and again, this is context. You got to think context here. Because they're coming off the Super Bowl. They still are the top team in the NFC, but Dallas is coming. You know, Dallas the year before had lost a playoff game to the Detroit Lions, and prior to last year, that was their last playoff win. That's the last time the Lions had won a playoff game. So Dallas is coming. They open the season on Monday night, September 7th of 1992. And the Cowboys win the game 23-10. Doesn't seem like a huge, devastating loss, but the feeling was, oh, my God, Cowboys are coming in, and the Redskins era may have come to an end here. The first score, Isaac Holt blocked the Kelly Goodburn punt out of the end zone. Goodburn was cut after that game, as it turned out. Keldon Martin had a 79-yard punt return, and Emmitt Smith lit them up for 140 yards and a touchdown. And even though they picked off Troy Aikman twice, they still lost that game. Here are the top 4. That's the bottom 3 that I can remember. Again, a lot of this is context here, okay? So it's not necessarily how the game turned out. It's not necessarily that, you know, they lost by 30 to Dallas in the opener in 1985, because they did win 10 games that year. That was the year that Joe Theismann broke his leg. But it's more of the context of where this team was at the time. So the 4th best opener that I can remember was September 12th of 2004 at FedEx Field. This was after the triumphant return of Joe Gibbs, where fans lined the driveway of then Redskin Park in the bitter cold to welcome back St. Joe, who was going to reverse the fortunes of the way things had gone after Marty Schottenheimer was fired and Steve Spurrier won 12 games over 2 years. Joe Gibbs still had the magic. And in the opening game, it looked like he did, because the first time that Clinton Portis touched the ball, he went 64 yards for a touchdown. But Gibbs was still running a 1980s offense, and they added 3 more field goals, which was the winning margin. They won 16-10, but they did it on the ground, 166 yards rushing. Portis carried 29 times for 148, and the defense did sack Brad Johnson 4 times. That was Greg Williams. That was part of Gibbs, you know, when he was coming back. Wanted to make sure he had Greg Williams as his defensive coordinator. That was a really good defensive team. But the euphoria of Gibbs winning his first game, I mean, you just can't imagine, because we had gone through, remember, this is still pretty early in Dan Snyder's ownership. So we'd gone through the ridiculous firing of Norv Turner with a 7-6 record. They collapsed against Dallas and Pittsburgh, missed the playoffs in 2000. Then he hires Marty Schottenheimer. They start 0-5. Marty turns it around. He still fires Marty because he's not having any fun. He brings in the old ball coach, who was fun, but they didn't win enough. And he left it at 5-11, not too good. So here comes Joe Gibbs, and he wins the opening game. And you got to remember, context again, how great you felt with Joe Gibbs back in the saddle. Number 3 on the list, and you have to be an old-timer to remember this, but I can remember it like it was yesterday. This was the first game that was coached by George Allen in Washington. Allen arrived and said the future is now. And in those days, the draft was in February, so he'd only been on the job like a couple of weeks before this happened. But on draft day, he traded most of his draft from 1971 and most of his draft from 1972 to bring in his old veterans from the Los Angeles Rams. And you had guys like Jack Pardee and Richie Pettibone came in. He'd made an earlier trade for Billy Kilmer, which proved to be very wise because Sonny Jurgensen broke his shoulder in the preseason. But you didn't really know because even though they played 6 exhibition games in those days, it's exhibition season. You really couldn't make a judgment. So how is this going to work out? And it's a team that had great offensive weapons. You had Larry Brown, who I think probably should get consideration for the Hall of Fame. Charlie Taylor, who is in the Hall of Fame as a receiver. Jerry Smith, who should get consideration for that. And so that was an offensive team, and we knew it was a good offensive team. But the defense, even though they had Chris Hamburger and, Brig Owens and, a few other good players, he had rebuilt the defense, and we really didn't know. We really didn't know how good that defense was, but it was great. And on this day, they opened the season at St. Louis. I remember they had the artificial turf there, and it was raining. And the Redskins won the game 24-17. There were 7 turnovers by St. Louis in this game. Jim Hart was intercepted 3 times. Pete Beathard, who's Bobby Beathard's brother, also played quarterback in that game and was picked off. And 3 of the interceptions went to Richie Pettibone, who was simply in the right place at the right time. They were wily veterans. They knew where to be. Brig Owens had another of the interceptions, and they ran the ball, which is what George Allen liked to do because he liked to give his defense a rest and didn't like to risk interceptions with throwing the ball. So Larry Brown and Charlie Haraway combined for 148 yards and a touchdown, and Chris Hamburger returned a fumble for a touchdown. So they win that game 24-17, and they went on to win the next 4, and they were on the cover of Newsweek. That was where George Allen was. The future is now. And I just remember that opener as, oh, my God, because at that point, what was I, 13 years old, and all I had seen as a fan of the football team was mediocrity. I'd seen Sonny Jurgensen throw a lot of touchdown passes as he did in the game against the Giants, but they lost 35-31. Well, now there was a defense to go along with these offensive weapons, and who knows how good they could have been. And there are those who believe that team was better, the 71 team, than the 72 team, which made it to the Super Bowl and lost to the Dolphins, but they lost Charlie Taylor in the 6th game of the year with a broken ankle, and that severely hurt their offense. The offense really wasn't the same the rest of the year. They still got in the playoffs, but that opener stands out to me. It may not stand out to you because you'd have to be probably in your 60s to remember it, but I am in my 60s, and I do remember that, and that's number 3 on my list. Number 2 on my list for openers, September 9th of 2012. And I think most people would put this as the best opener of all time because this was the one where they rolled out RG3. This is where this was like the awakening. Oh, my God. We hadn't seen any of this in the preseason. But they ran that pistol offense, and it worked. The first time they ran it, it worked to perfection because RG3 threw an 88-yard touchdown pass to Pierre Garçon. And you remember Griffin on his rear end and holding his 2 hands up in the air, pointing number 1, and they called that Griffining. And that was after this game, which they won against the Saints. They were 6.5-point underdogs. They wind up winning this game 40-32. And Tony wrote, I think he was still writing then, he said, "This is the era of unbridled optimism." And it was. It was an unbelievably optimistic period. RG3 in this game, 19 of 26 for 320 yards. He rushed twice for touchdowns. Alfred Morris had 96 yards. They were just rolling that day. And there was great euphoria. Oh my God. They went to New Orleans with Drew Brees and they beat the Saints. And look at what RG3 did. Oh, my God, look at that. All right, number 1 on the list. And, again, I think most people would look at the 2012 game, the opening game for RG3, and say that's the best opener of all time. Here is number 1 on my list. And the reason is, again, it's time and place. So let's go back here. George Allen leaves after the 1977 season. There's, some question whether he was fired or left or whatever. He went to the Rams, lasted half the preseason, got fired there, never coached in the NFL again. In the meantime, Jack Pardee comes in as coach. Pardee had been Allen's coach on the field. He had done a good job coaching in the World Football League when his players weren't getting paid. Then he went to the Bears, and he did well there and had a playoff team, I think. I think he did. And then he comes to Washington for the 1978, 79, and 80 season. And, if things hadn't gone the way they did in that last game of the 1979 season, who knows? He might have stayed on that team was capable of winning the Super Bowl. They were that good. But they lost to the Cowboys in that game, and that season ended at 10-6 because they went into that game. They either had to win it and win the division, or if they lost, they were out. And so they were out. And so Pardee comes back in 1980. They go 6-10. He has to go, and Joe Gibbs comes in. Joe Gibbs goes 0-5 to start the 81 season, but by the end of the year, they're 500. We still don't really know how good they are. Also, they have drafted a kicker, which is unusual. In late rounds, they took Danny Miller out of the University of Miami. And the assumption was he was going to take the job of the aging Mark Mosley. They thought Mosley was done. And in training camp, it was very close. And as a matter of fact, they had both kickers on the active roster for the opening game at Philadelphia, September 12th, 1982. But they chose to make Miller inactive, which was the smartest thing they could have done because they're touchdown underdogs in this game. And it comes down to the end of the game, and they need a 48-yard field goal to send it into overtime. There's no, there's overtime, but there's no two-point conversion then, whatever. They need a 48-yard field goal on the last play of regulation. Mosley kicks it through. They go to overtime, and he kicks a 26-yarder in overtime, and they win 37-34. Now, they played the following week at Tampa in the rain. They won, and then the league went out for 2 months on strike. But the team stayed together. And in that opening game, and I've talked to John Riggins about this, he said when Mosley hit that 48-yard field goal, it was like the bolt of lightning that propelled them for the next 5-6 years. He said, once he did that, we realized that there was something special here, and we could get it done. And so I look at that as like the launch of an era. Joe Theismann was very good in this game. He threw for 382 yards and 2 touchdowns, and the defense did its job. They sacked Ron Jaworski 6 times in the game. But this was really, you talk about a tone setter. This was really it, that they beat a division rival, a team that had been to the Super Bowl just 2 years earlier. You remember the Eagles made it in the 1980 season. So in 1981, the Redskins are building. They're overcoming that terrible start. Gibbs changes the offense. And, even in this game, Riggins really didn't, overwhelm everybody. The 82 season, people forget that although Riggins was unbelievable in the postseason and set the then record in the Super Bowl with 166 yards and had the most famous play in team history when he ran for that 4th and 1 touchdown, shedding Don McNeil, he really wasn't the workhorse in this early part of the season. They were still trying to find themselves. And as a matter of fact, John said that the year before, when he'd come back from sitting out a year, it sat out 1980 when they finished 6-10, he was so bad at the beginning of the year, he said he thought the coaches were going to cut him. But he got his legs back under him, and then by 82 he started to roll, and then the playoffs, the rest is history. But if you look at openers and you look at how these things launch, and this is why Sunday is going to be so key to see that. I mean, are we going to see the start of something big like the RG3 one promised to be and went south for a variety of reasons, including injury? Or, is this going to be just one of those mundane openers? Hard to tell. I mean, it's not anything that we're going to know until after the game. But you look at this and you say, man, what happened on September 12th, 1982, if you want to look at the Camelot era, the era that us old-timers always pine for and tell young people, hey, it actually could be this good around here. It was at that time. It started with that game. So if you look at openers that we've had in the past, like 84, this was kind of the end of it, as they get to back-to-back Super Bowls, and that's, the beginning of the end of the Theismann-Riggo era, or whether it was losing to the Cowboys in 92, which was the end of the second big surge under Joe Gibbs 1, or whether you look at the launch, like I say 71, when the George Allen era launches with this great defensive performance, which we had not seen before here against St. Louis, or the big moment where Mosley hits the 48-yard field goal, and for a guy who was possibly going to be cut in the preseason, not only hits the big field goal, but winds up winning the league MVP that year as he set the then record for consecutive field goals at 23. And in an odd year where they only played 9 regular season games because of the strike, he was the MVP. And it all started with the big boot of 48 yards to send that game into overtime and then win it with a 26-yard field goal. So we will see what Sunday brings, but that's a little historical look. I'm sure you have your own favorite memories of opening games or disastrous games to start the season, but that's my list and I'm sticking to it. Anyway, that's a wrap for me for the week. Bram is coming up next, and I'll see you back here Monday morning at 9 a.m.